Hi everyone, it's Josh. Just before we start the episode, I just wanted to let you know that there were a few technical difficulties and the sound is a little funky fresh. But we had a great discussion and I hope you enjoy. Hello, the internet. Welcome to They Came from the Silver Screen, a podcast where we deconstruct a film each episode and talk about its cultural relevance. I'm Josh Tregenza, and joined with me, as always, is the Double Down Danger himself, Damian Danaher. How are we, Damian?
I am fantastic, mate. How are you going?
I'm doing pretty good, pretty good. We got
That's
through
all
the
we
first
want.
week, and now we're ready.
Just,
Just. And we're
just so ever so, like by the skin of our teeth.
oh, it was, yeah. But, first episode in, I'm not, there's not the angry mob at our doorstep, so that's
Well,
good
not
news.
yet. Give it time. Give it time, mate.
First episode done. We're doing all right. We're still here. We're still kicking, and we're going to be finishing off kind of our DC movie battle. I guess the battle's the right word for it.
Sucks, I guess, would be the more polite version.
Yeah, yeah. We don't have to be
I, I
polite.
know. Let's look at it at the conclusion of our discussion of the DC film universe. Blissfully, at least for the moment, until Suicide Squad comes out in August. But we wanted to cap this off with doing a God help us all retrospective look back at how this blessed mess all began, which is, of course, with the birth of the first film in this new cinematic universe, Man of Steel.
Correct. Where it all started, the origin of Superman, or at least a person we're calling Superman.
I think we'll find, towards the end of this discussion that I think we'll agree basically wasn't so much Superman so much as an alien creature that happened to look and act and basically be Superman, but not in any of the ways that actually counted.
Absolutely. But I think this film, like, before it came out, there was a lot of anticipation for it, a lot of high
Well,
hopes for it.
I think that part of that was basically because the last time they actually tried to reboot the franchise itself, or just like the character of Superman on film, even was leaving aside the Smallville series, Bryan Singer's 2006 Superman Returns with Brandon Routh, which I mean will be remembered for a whole mess of things. Kevin Spacey's mostly hilarious turn as Lex Luthor, the absolutely ill-advised introduction of Superboy or Super Baby or whatever you want to call him. But mostly I think it's going to be remembered for being incredibly boring.
And, of course, adding another tally to the James Marsden can't catch a break in any of the films he's in.
I feel so bad for that guy because he's done nothing but right by everyone.
And yet people have done him wrong.
Hey man, he was in Hairspray.
And he didn't win or lose, which is a win for him.
He can take that. He can take that with him wherever he goes. He can take that to the grave. I was in Hairspray, and it was all right.
And, and then I was in the Straw Dogs reboot.
Oh,
Whoops.
bless him. I like how you can just like slip and fall and accidentally get up, and suddenly you're in an utterly ill-advised remake of a perfect Sam Peckinpah film. You know has that ever happened to you?
It happened once. It was.
Oh God, that's a story for another time. All right, I'm going to be the adult here and steer this shit back onto the path that I should point out, viewers, that we made a concerted and definitive agreement that we were going to make this podcast significantly shorter than the first one, and I think you'll all be pleased to see that that's going terribly so far.
Absolutely. Yeah, but this was like Superman Returns was basically it ended the Reeves Superman era, for better or for worse. Well, it was
Of
for worse.
happiness and hope, yeah.
Yeah, there, and three and four weren't particularly good films.
I would argue were appalling films.
Yeah, well, up against up against Returns and Man of Steel, they're not half bad. But yeah, it's so
Ouch, but also yes.
yeah. So this is and then of course Snyder coming off Watchmen, and then Sucker Punch. Um, Sucker Punch at the time we still felt pretty confident in Snyder's ability to pull off a good film, particularly around superheroes with Watchmen. So we were all pretty excited to see what was happening.
The combo of Watchmen and Sucker Punch basically alluded to the audience that as long as his hands didn't touch the story or script, Snyder could make a good movie.
Unfortunately, as with Batman vs Superman, Goya, David S. Goya, was part of this production as well.
And you can give us a brief history on this man's involvement with the DC universe in terms of its filmic universe, because this man had his fingerprints on everything, not just
not just DC. Not just DC. He had his hands in Blade, which is where he should have stayed back in that era where you could be campy and over dramatic and bombastic in what you were putting on screen, because no one gave a shit. As soon as the Batman Nolan trilogy came along, Goya was starting to warp it. And this is a man who is a movie writer. I think he's touched about 2 or 3 comic books, but he doesn't have the talent or really an understanding of these characters to truly do them justice.
And yet this is a man that's called upon again and again to actually faithfully translate said characters to the screen.
It astounds me. What dirt does he have on the WB to be able to keep getting these roles? Or is it just WB's sheer incompetence, where they think that this is the best that they could do, even though they have literally all of the DC comic book writers at their disposal, as they effectively own that comic book company?
I couldn't possibly say. You'd have to assume that incompetence wouldn't play a part, but you know what, man? I don't actually know. But I mean, so let's have a very quick look at basically. So we've come off of the back of the for better or for worse, depending on your opinion of the situation, the critically lauded and universally publicly acclaimed Nolan trilogy, that basically took a character that even though original appearances may say to the contrary, is a fantastical character, is an utterly illogical character, not only in the breadth. I mean, you read like a new article every couple of months about saying exactly how rich Bruce Wayne would have to be able to do all the shit that he does. But leaving aside all of that, just the zeal and the fanaticism of the character in the comic books, they basically departed all of that to do the Nolan films. And we discussed this last week, but basically, contrary to every other comic story or even movie, this is a man who did not in any way or shape want to be Batman. And then so tied into the more kind of, I mean, you look at the more at least not, if not like plausible villains, at least the more sort of, I guess, like anatomically like sort of plausible, ones. So you don't see any of the more fantastical villains of like the Batman's gone up against in his life. You see sorry, is it Ra's or Russ?
It's Rash, I believe. I believe it has a roll to it at the start. I believe it's the proper Arabic pronunciation of it. Please correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Sizable Arab audience that we've got. Sorry, no, I shouldn't discriminate. I'm sure. Never mind. Never
No, if
mind.
you are,
Big time.
please let us know. I really do want to make sure that I'm getting that pronunciation right because I do try and make sure that it is, uh, uh, the correct one, particularly for Rush, because that shit matters. Um, they made fun of it in Batman Begins. I believe it's like, is it Rush or
Oh
Raish?
yes, I
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah, and I
So
sort
they
of.
even made fun of that, and then I believe they still got it incorrect. So you know,
So I mean, yeah, but I mean, like to leave aside that sort of stuff. I mean, you have Russ Al Ghul, or however you desire to
mm,
pronounce him. You have the Joker. You have Bane, which although in the comics he's this 8 foot tall Latino giant, they found a way to sort of transmute and reduce or whatever you want to call it him
yeah, I
into the film.
guess
There was no Robin. There was no extended sort of universe. The Batcave was very minimalist. It was, I mean, even like in Dark Knight Rises, there was these kind of like hints towards um, the pit of what do you call it?
the Lazarus Pit.
Lazarus pit,
Mm.
basically of eternal life and everything like that. And even that was transmuted and changed into he achieves eternal life through the works of others. So they then turned that fantastical element into something that was realistic and plausible. And so, I mean, if we look at all of that and the structure of all of those movies, and then basically take it forward to Nolan deciding that he had the uh, the way to reboot this property,
Yeah,
and then it was Goya to help him, and we basically find themselves teaming up with Snyder, who has a proven track record as visually very exciting director, creative in his shot selection and composition, has imagination, has a love of comic books. He fits all the boxes, and we have this collaboration going forward that, by all accounts, should have created, an amazing film, but then ended up not.
well, yeah, because it was as much as so the Nolan trilogy now doesn't mean anything in terms of this universe that they've
Yes, we
created.
point out to people that have always been confused about this. This is a completely separate world
Yeah,
that these
but
new movies exist in.
what doesn't what is understandable why people are confused about it because Man of Steel was so reactionary to what was happening in Batman. You know,
And came so
let's
quickly off the back of those films as well.
absolutely, and let's get right into it. This is this is the origin story of Superman, who is in this iteration he is a reluctant hero. He does well, and this origin story doesn't even play it out like it is really his fault. It is a strange circumstance of his father's uh, using him as a pawn to whatever end that they deem is necessary for that particular point in time.
I'm sure we can talk about this later, but my initial question to that was, which father do you mean? But of course, as we'll find out as we discuss further, it could be either one.
Absolutely, and that's it is it is a it is a frustrating film in that, and a lot of what we've said in Batman versus Superman still it started here. you know Pacing is off. um, Characterizations are just not quite right. It has all of the pieces there that it could be a very good film, but it just falls short.
Well, let's try and go through this beat by beat then. So, if we just look at the all the major story beats of the film, let's start with the first and the biggest, obviously, the birth of Superman.
Yeah. So, and this is Birth of Superman. This is a crazy departure because it brings to light that Superman is an even more special child than he already would be. He was he started off as just a child of a distant planet that was doomed, and his parents were highly scientific, and they were able to jettison him off the planet to be safe. Um, these were very loving parents that only wanted the best for their newborn child. In this version, uh, Kal-El is the first naturally conceived child in centuries, because it is a very socialist planet that Krypton is, where each child is basically born in a organic test tube.
And is this true in the film itself, or is this a lift from the comics?
No, this is new to the film. Um, Superman was always just an average person on. He would be an average person on Krypton. He would be free to choose between. I believe there were three sections, with three main guilds of the planet: the science, the military, and I believe it's agriculture. Um, those were the three main ones that you could kind of choose from in that society. But
Just a thoroughly curious notion, considering if you recall the film's depiction of the planet, that seemed like a location where subsistence farming of any kind hadn't been practiced in centuries.
well, because of the ham-fisted statement of they've ruined the planet by they depleted all of the natural resources, and of course that caused their planet to explode. Not just the sheer you know the planet itself. Just this is what happens to a planet over time. It dies. No, it is the cause of the people. In this very Giger-esque depiction of Krypton. Previous times we had seen it all crystallized.
That's so correct. I'd never really thought of that. That it was actually like there is that kind of like Giger or Geiger-esque. For the viewers who don't know, H.R. Geiger was the Hungarian-born visual artist who basically designed the Alien of Ridley Scott's eponymous movie. And so you have this very curious and mildly offsetting marriage of technology and organic life that brings across this very sort of strange notion of something that is mechanical but also alive, and it's off-putting because of that. And it had never occurred to me that was actually the design choice that they'd made there, but it absolutely is, even in the costuming.
Yeah, and it is so
The way
far
the way
removed.
the way the armor grows
Mm-hmm.
onto them.
Yeah, the masks are very much what we would then see in Prometheus for the engineers.
It's fascinating you say that, because then you also see it. I don't know if you saw much of Neil Blomkamp's concept art for his
I have, yes. It looks very much like it.
aborted Alien 5 film, but yeah, a lot of his concept art for Ripley, beg your pardon,
Mm-hmm.
in her spacesuit is this very almost like he's basically taken Geiger's work and run with it. This very organic, very kind of almost membrane-ish spacesuit, which isn't a surprise really, because Geiger, a lot of his work, if you've seen any of his other stuff, is very kind of like uncomfortably sexual in nature. I mean, one of his most prominent art books was, and I'm not going to get the name right, but was basically Necrophiliac Volume 1 or something like that. This like fine marriage of technology and death and sex.
Yeah, and it's very strange for a Superman film to have
And
this
so,
sort of design
do you
aesthetic to it.
think, that design aesthetic aside for the second, do you think that this decision to basically jack up the stakes of the leaving Krypton and everything like that from basically just this is a planet at the end of its life to this is a planet that has been forcibly mined into destruction. Is this like a moral, like, sort of a bit of speechifying here, or do you think this is just the studio or the writers or Snyder's notion of like this modern audience? What will they understand? Will they understand a planet like billions of years in the future just basically giving up the ghost, or do you think like we need that kind of violent abuse of the planet to sort of truly sympathize with the situation, because we can basically go, oh, I see, that's what we're going to be in 100 years.
I think it would be if it kept it going, and if in some ways that it didn't just use it as the excuse for
Right.
the planet.
Because there was a lot of stuff in that history that didn't make sense, and if we just like leap forward for a second and talk about the Krypton ship in the Antarctic, him talking with the hologram
the scout ship
of Jor-El, and him basically saying that we were explorers and then suddenly we weren't.
Yeah, and it
there
just stopped.
No explanation as to why they suddenly stopped this, celestial colonization. It was basically just because, like, narratively speaking, it was expedient for us to abandon outward travel and have only one planet left that we could live on. And then when the planet just was destroyed, that's a dramatic moment. I mean, it just doesn't scan. It doesn't stack up.
It is another oddity of this film. It is the isolation that it's creating, where yes, these things happen, but nothing else happened with it. Where in the comics, there is the cousin planet of Krypton called Daxam, which is basically everyone is as powerful as a Krypton a Kryptonian under the yellow sun. But they also have a deathly allergic reaction to lead. So they're the closest planet to them, but they've cut themselves off from the.
I guarantee
the
we will
universe.
never hear a peep about them
Never.
in the movies. Ever.
And we never will, because they've already set up the fact that any colony that tried to voyage out of the planet Krypton, they died, and then they were
for no particular reason.
No particular reason other than to maybe explain why
because
army is
because
now
script
armed.
required they do.
Yeah, exactly. And it was it's very strange. And then they bring in this. It reminds me of Transformers. It's the Codex. It's the buzzword.
So, which I'm sure is not a comparison Snyder and co were hoping for.
And yet it is continued. We said it. Once again, we've said it in Batman vs Superman that this is. People are enjoying this in the same way that they're enjoying Transformers. And now a week on. This is now 2 weeks on from it being shown. Batman vs Superman just isn't holding up to snuff as a Transformers would.
No, Transformers would continue, and I think the reason because of that is basically because when someone sees a Transformers movie, they know what they're going to get. And Michael Bay, I mean, whatever people want to say about him, he's a man that unabashedly knows exactly what he is as a director. And so when he delivers a product like a Transformers movie or like that fucking awful movie Pain and Gain or any of those ones, I mean, you may want to diss him out on it, but I mean, the people that go to see those movies know exactly what they're getting when they walk in. Whereas if you look at Snyder, we had this conversation last week, that Snyder's basically the bastard love child of Nolan and Bay. He has the same cinematic and visual inclinations as Bay does, but he has the intellectual narrative aspirations of Nolan. And the problem is, whenever he tries to access that part of it, he always fails.
Yeah, and it's this. Nolan does have this detachment to it um, that I believe Snyder did try and bring across uh, with his Superman. And
Yeah, but he failed though.
well, yeah, he did because it's a fundamental flaw in the fact that Superman is supposed to be a very loving person. He loves the planet that he is now um,
A sense of,
part
yeah.
of. Yeah, he and he wants to do everything that he can, and he doesn't want. He wants to make sure that no one can get hurt if possible. That
And
Superman finds a way, and yet the first time that we really apart from when Superman is interacting with another main character, when he first finds the scout ship and Lois Lane comes on board and she's attacked by one of the robots, um, we see Superman helping someone by cauterizing her wound, and then her screaming blue murder. And it is such a terrifying way to be introduced to a savior character.
it is, and it kind of like thematically carries through for the rest of the movie, and it's basically the first step in constructing a film that basically. The best way I could describe it, I remember like when we first saw it back, way back when. The best way I could possibly describe that film was that it wasn't. I mean, as we said before, I mean, like this is not a Superman film, but what I actually sort of felt it was more like, this is a science fiction alien Among Us film.
Mm.
Happens to be called Superman, and it's kind of curious that this mirrors your designation of Nolan's Batman films that we saw last week. That this is film noir that happens to have Batman in it. And it's funny, like when we talk about the difference between like Snyder trying to mirror the kind of intellectual detachment of Nolan, I think the difference is that he tried to apply a Batman ethos to a character that, by all sense and purposes, you know, intellectually and ideologically speaking, is meant to be the mirror opposite of Batman, which, of course, I mean, if that had been the case, would have made the rivalry in Batman v Superman that more powerful. And because Nolan basically takes Batman and applies that sense of Kubrickian intellectual detachment that we've discussed before to it, and what manifests is a Batman who isn't ideologically secure, isn't emotionally stable, wants to remove himself from the acts that he does as much as humanly possible. And at least for those kind of films, the Nolan versions, that was a valid narrative choice because we were going with this very cerebral interpretation. But if you then take that and transmute it across to Man of Steel and then put the filter through Snyder as well, what was meant to come across as a kind of intellectual attachment comes across instead, and I feel this is the crux of like what the whole movie has gotten wrong, as a sense of not deliberate emotional disconnect, but an almost anthropological disinterest. This is a creature that wears the guise of a human, but understands and interacts with humans on only the most base and anatomical level. Almost like, I mean, like you said, the Lois Lane scene, like that thing, the cauterizing the wound, being so nonchalant about it. This is not someone who understands the emotional ins and outs of like what was going through Lois's mind in that scene. This is just this kind of almost alien curiosity with this wounded creature. It's like the same way like we would, observe a wounded animal.
Mm. And yeah,
Sorry,
you
I
see
spoke
it.
for a
You
long
see it
time.
throughout. You see it throughout that initial chunk of before Clark gets the Superman suit, which he is just given. There's no pomp or circumstance to it. It's just here, have this, and then you're Superman. We give you the right to continue it. It's just basically doing it. But
Yeah, but
yeah,
he's bequeathed it because, of course, I'm gonna keep using the phrase, but he's given the suit because the narrative and the script requires that he get in the suit at some point.
yeah,
There's no
absolutely.
explanation. I mean, you look at every other Kryptonian uniform, which like the suit is basically modelled on, and none of the rest of them are like that. None of them
None
are
of them,
bright.
yeah, none of them are coloured. And
No,
why did he have
there's
it?
no colours in any of that. Yeah,
Yeah, the
but,
reason why his
and
were
why
colourful.
and why yeah, and why did that specific ship have this specific outfit?
Yeah, for the L family. It doesn't make any sense. You know, the reason why Superman's clothes were the way they are is because it was his baby. It was the baby blanket that he was brought on, uh, and his mother then, his Earth mother, Martha,
Mark, or as we shall always know from Martha Kent. God help us all.
Martha Kent, uh, you know, made this for him. You know, out of love, out of understanding that he is to do great things, and
Which is another link to the comics sort of very concerted and deliberate attempt to make this a man of Earth, to link him as a human being to these people. This is a suit that was crafted by you know his human surrogate mother, and none of that occurs. There's none of this humanizing, none of this
and well,
close.
to give Diane Lane's Martha Kent credit, she is a very loving mother. She does think the world of Clark, and really does want what's best for him. Unfortunately, uh, Jonathan Kent, Pa Kent, is the complete opposite of that, and this is where one of
which
the
was also
biggest
which was
issues.
also true in Batman v Superman. We discussed this,
Mm.
that Mark Kent gave her son some beautiful advice on how to deal with world's opinion of him and everything like that, and then not 20 minutes later, Pa Kent gives him completely conflicting and, to be fair, far more violent advice on what's to go down. And that is, as you say, the crux of the ideological problem with this film's interpretation of Superman.
Yeah,
That
this is
the primary, I mean, like in Batman v Superman, you of course can argue that Mark Kent was the primary sort of moral center for him as a character because, well, she's the only one that's still alive. But I mean, for better or for worse, Pa Kent was the motivating force behind him in that entire movie, and not only his character, but also his arc, as I'm sure you'll explain to us in a second,
yeah. Let's
was
get right into that.
was completely incorrect for how to construct the true character of what we always thought and knew of as Superman. So let's just take it away with that. Let's talk about the character, the arc of Pa Kent.
Yeah, so Parker, and this I have this has consumed me throughout the years after seeing this film, because it just doesn't make sense to me. You know, we never see the Kents actually find uh, baby Kal-El once he's touched down on Earth. We never see that interaction. Uh, we never see the fact that Martha is sterile. She can't have children. Um, and this is this child is a blessing to them. That this is truly a miracle. We first see Clark doing good because that's his nature, and then then Pa Kent saying yeah, it's great that you did that, but you really shouldn't, because if the world finds out, things are going to change. And he is so steeped in fear and paranoia that no, I can't let this secret get out. But at the same time, he keeps stating to Clark that no, you are different, and you must keep that inside. And that's
which is fascinating purely because it speaks so much to the Nolan influence, the paranoia, the terror, the fear of the other that comes through in all of those
And
movies.
this is not what Superman should be. This
Exactly,
is
but
not. You shouldn't steep it in xenophobia unless you're, Zod. Zod is xenophobic. He hates humanity. In very much a similar way to how like Lucifer is stated to hate humanity because they got God's they got Jesus Christ, and they got God's love, which Jor-El and Kal-El's love. Let's play right into what Snyder's doing in showing uh, Superman as a Jesus figure for whatever
well, I
reason.
mean, yeah, I mean, we can jump back ever so briefly to your discussion of how they changed the canon so much for this controlled artificial birth. So I mean, like, it's just overemphasizing it, like, straight away, the first natural birth on Krypton in centuries. This is, I mean, aside from the immaculate conception part, this is basically a miracle birth. This is a Christ-like birth by Kryptonian standards, and it's certainly not the last time they go about dishing out the Christ allegories in this film.
Yeah, and so you've got that. You've got the villains are supposed to be the xenophobic people. Zod, Lex Luthor. There is this hate of the other, the alien. The a father. This doesn't this stretches out far beyond just a film. A father should be all inclusive to try and make sure that their child is doing the best that they can. And Pa Kent doesn't. He
No, he
in
does.
a critical scene.
He doesn't ask him to aspire to be the best that he can be.
No, he
He
says
actually
keep
he
it.
actually he actually forcibly tells him to pipe the fuck down and, like, not do anything.
Yeah, yeah. Sit down. We don't want to hear you. We don't want you to help with this. We've got this.
It's that scene in the bus where the aftermath is a couple of the parents freaking out because they saw what Clark did, and him asking Pa Kent, should I have just let them die? And he says, yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
oh yeah. It's like he has to
you,
say
you,
that it's like, oh,
you,
you did the right thing, but at the same time, you could have let them all die because then your secret would have been let out. You see what
it's that
happens when you do
like,
this.
again, that fear of the other,
Yeah.
that
Look what happens when you look like you're different.
turn, yeah, that at every turn corrupts the manifold and, I would suggest, core point of Superman, that he is the best of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. He strives. He should do the best that that anyone could. He is able to take the worst scenario possible and make it gold because that's what Superman is able to do.
And that is what humans are able to do, I think, is more the point. That he is,
Yes, yes.
that he is able to take, like, any human in that situation, he can make it the best possible situation that a man or a woman or a child could make that situation be. And we never once see that kind of hope
And
in that
he's
film. They talk about hope a lot. They talk
yeah,
about hope a lot in that movie, and they talk about hope in Batman v Superman even more. But it never once resonates because you don't believe for a second that this character is actually motivated by some kind of overarching sense of good intentions. He's basically just this conflicted being pressured into doing the right thing because, oh well, people will think ill of me if I don't.
yeah. It is yeah. He is given all these things, and it's a struggle for him to do it. Now here's where up until all of that with Pa Kent, that's okay because you can turn it around at one pivotal spot, which
Yes, but
is
let's talk about it. His
yeah,
death.
Pa Kent's death, which is
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know if that was
Spoilers.
the point where I exclaimed very loudly in the cinema when we first saw this. Just the
Yeah, it was
fuck
because I was
off.
sitting right next. I
Yeah,
was sitting right next to you when it happened. So yeah, that's exactly
yeah.
when I said fuck.
I was yeah. I was angry about this because that is not right. So,
Oh
but
really? So I couldn't tell. You were so measured in your opinion of that film throughout the screening.
so, but you could have turned it around at that point, because up until that point, Park Kent has been saying, no, you need to sit down. You need to keep you need to keep your true self under wraps. Don't let the world see you as it is, because they will not accept you. Now, from there, Park Kent's like, no, don't save me. Don't save me. We can't, you can't let people know who you are. If at that point Clark then decided, no, I'm not listening to you at this. I know that I can save you.
That my own sense of
Of right.
anonymity is less important than the good of humanity.
Yes, and that's
That I shall put that before my own fears, my own insecurities, because those are Clark Kent problems. And when I'm Superman, I don't have those problems. I'm here to, God forbid, in this movie's opinion, save lives.
and it's yeah, it set it all up for that to be able to reject a father's guidance.
Strike out on your own.
Yeah, this is who I am. You
That's
know,
the thing. Be the best of what has come before, but be better because you know better.
and it's such a missed opportunity. It really, like, that point could have redefined, who Park Kent was, because he was always, he was very much an Uncle Ben, just like, well, Clark, you got to do your best. You've got great power. You got to help them all out. But except he didn't die. He just kept going with Mark Kent, up until the point where he dies of a heart attack. And dying of a heart attack is, once again, a really important thing to happen to Superman, because it just goes to show that even as good as he is, as uh, as much as he can save everyone, there's still things that he can't stop, and a heart attack
Which
would be one
teaches
of them.
humility,
Absolutely. So he's
humility of death, which I would argue. I mean, we can, retrospective vision is a fantastic thing, but we should have talked about this last week. But I mean, that lack of humility in the face of death directly contributed towards the just sheer arrogance of his character's portrayal in Batman v Superman, because this was a guy that just didn't give a fuck.
and not only that, but he is never he never faced anyone. Well, he had a schoolboy arrogance, because he got his new clothes. He's got the leather jacket now. He's off on the road. He's got a new car. He's driving around, or flying around in Superman's case. And then, bam, alien invasion comes in. It's Zod. He's looking for the refugee, and the world wants to give that refugee back. Which, you know, draw that what you will in current events.
And I'm sure people will.
And
I think it's giving way too much credit to the movie and its writers to assume that they actually meant that as some sort of any, like, even vague allegory. But well, hey, that's for other people to decide, I'm sure.
yeah, and then so you never see Superman make a name for himself before being branded as this refugee.
And that's the
That
thing
this
as
is the
well.
reason why this
And
alien race has come down and made contact, is because of this person that they have no idea of. The only person
and
that really
yeah,
knows is Lois Lane, who was very it was very easy for her to backtrack and find out who this stranger was.
yes. Again, I mean, like, we can talk about this until I drop from lack of oxygen. But the amount of narrative convenience in this movie is simply fucking awe-inspiring.
It doesn't
Because I mean,
make any sense.
yeah, because she meets him once on the Kryptonian ship in Antarctica, and then suddenly she interviews two former bosses, and then she just finds his house, and that's it. The end.
And then
Greatest fucking investigative reporter ever. Woodward and Bernstein would fucking bow down to this woman. Solved a mystery in like what I can assume cinematically is like, 1 or 2 months. What anyone else would have taken goddamn years to solve through fucking breadcrumb notions of story and allegations. But you know what? Never mind, because movie.
And yet, 2 years on, world's greatest detective, Batman, couldn't find out who Superman was during that entire time.
No, not at all. Because it's not like they looked alike.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not like he a close-up look at both of them in different guises and had any chance, through like let's say, a turgid dramatic pause to kind of observe these characters and tell the difference. Because no, that'd just make no sense.
Because you never do see like Superman and Clark Kent are really the same person throughout this film until the very last scene, when Clark puts on the glasses and then he's working at the Daily Planet now, which is very strange because I don't think he has any credentials for it.
No, because it was never built up the same way that like Smallville or any of the other ones did, where like he was the school reporter and he built his fucking resume up, and then like when he got the big gig in the newspaper, you're like, all right, yeah, no, I get that, I understand that narrative progression, that makes sense, for heaven's sake. But I mean, it kind of also I had a point, but I forgot it. Never mind. Keep going.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is once again, like as you were saying before, he's just given it because the plot demands that he needs to wear this suit, this Superman's attire, and he needs to be Clark Kent who works at the Daily Planet.
Actually, no, I've just remembered. I remembered exactly what my point is. Sorry, but it's gonna be a dig about maybe Superman, but I know you're not gonna be upset about that, really.
Never am.
Is just because I was thinking of it before and I thought of it again now. Look, the ending of that movie basically said that all right, like they had the big fucking hero's funeral for Superman, and at the exact same time, it's plastered in the newspapers, and they have this very personal burial for Clark Kent. So my question is, when he presumably comes back for Justice League, how do they fucking scan that Superman and Clark Kent basically both return to life at exactly the same time and no one asks any questions about that?
I feel like they're just going to sweep it under the rug, much the same way as how...
Sorry. Oh, I forgot about the rug. I'm sorry. I forgot about the plot hole rug. Oh, it's been in the corner for years. I'd almost forgotten that it was there. Why?
Or, might as well, the Jor-El, Deus Ex Father comes in and just snaps his fingers and be like, no one remembers who Clark Kent even was anymore. Because
they probably would.
Russell Crowe, throughout it, he really, gets his money's worth in on this film, far more than, Marlon Brando.
Marlon Brando ever did, yeah. But again, a lot of his dialogue to, Cal is basically a slightly different bent on what Clark Kent is basically dishing to him, which is basically, in the most simplistic terms possible, you are superior to these people. You are not here to represent them or to save them. You are there to basically, like Russell Crowe in the movie says, you are there to give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. But that distilled with like Clark Kent's, eulogies is basically saying you are there to, like, for lack of a better word, be another fucking, like, be a god for them. Well, I know, but he actually
token.
He says that as well at the start of the movie, like,
You will be a
I
god to these people. You know, you will
yes,
have
like
such
they
strength and
they, 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 they will kill him. How? He will be a god. So, like, at the very first, in the first 15 minutes of the film, they are not painting this guy as just some bloke from another world that, like, learns to be what it is to be human. This is a guy who is an alien first and a human second. And that resonates throughout the entire film as someone who just doesn't quite fit in, like, but not because he's, like, unfamiliar with humanity or he's, like, still learning, but because he doesn't want,
because he's been consistently told
that he doesn't need to.
that he either doesn't fit in, and because he doesn't fit in, he needs to shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And that happens so much with many people. And then this film goes ahead and says, yeah, you know what? These two fathers that Superman has, they're both correct. You should be you should be seen, and then people, you know, draw conclusions about you. Uh, and you also should fit in. You need to pipe down, otherwise, things could go very wrong. If you ever show any sort of individuality,
Oh, God forbid.
and it's just this is these are two in the comics, these are two fathers who are so loving. These are basically, this is a God and Joseph sort of thing, where they both love their you know this boy, that they are, and they want him to be the best that he can be.
And the whole point of, I mean, like, you know, you know, can't believe I'm actually doing this, but I mean, like, the whole point of, oh, dare I say it, basically, like, the Christ story in general was basically that he was the best of both a God, or sorry, beg your pardon, Christians, the God and humanity.
Yeah,
He was the fucking natural middle between both of those impulses.
but
The
better than both of them.
But better than both because he had both.
Hmm.
He had the perspective of both sides, and then you could find the middle ground that was just that absolute fucking sweet spot of,
And that has always been what Superman's about. He is a Christ-like figure. It's in the comic books, it's far more about like Moses, that he's taken to the river and pushed down it in the basket, where the next family gets him and raises him, and he becomes a great man. That's there's always been those religious overtones to this character, and yet Snyder and Goyer refuse to actually put that into the character and merely just allude to it. They just go, yes, look at this imagery. Yes, he is a deity who we should all be worshipping, but never give you reason to actually want to.
So, given everything that we've discussed up until this point, how do you think this all manifests, both in positive and, to be honest, far more negative ways in the climax, the final battle between Superman and Zod, the supposed two completely conflicting ideologies that I would personally argue at the outro actually don't seem to be too different, and both the context of the battle and how that manifested itself as basically a complete dichotomy of what the character of Superman represented.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's this whole thing, and Michael Shannon is the best thing about this film. Like, of course he is. Of course he is. It's
Absolutely.
Michael goddamn Shannon.
And is the best thing about most films ever.
Yeah, and so he really brings it to this whole thing, and it's really unfortunate that the rest of the film kind of lets him down He chews the shit out of this, much like a Zod should. Terrence Howard
I
was
feel like he's the only guy that actually truly understood what kind of movie they should have been making.
yeah.
And so he handed the fuck up, and people criticized him after the fact for being too over the top. But I mean, like, my personal opinion was that he was the only guy that was actually on the level that everyone else should have been upon.
That is what Zod is. He is a malicious dictator who is driven by his mission. His mission is, in this instance, is to protect Krypton, is to make sure that it survives. That is what he did, and so it was a perfect character in that of course he's doing everything he can to do it, and then Superman stops that, and then he unleashes himself. He unleashes himself on Superman and the entirety of Metropolis. Unfortunately, Superman's okay with that because he doesn't know about collateral damage. He's
No.
Every time that we've seen him be who he be the superhero that he is, he's on an oil rig where it doesn't really matter if the entire thing goes down because it's in the middle of the ocean, and fuck the natural ecosystem, right, Superman?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so like he's never had that amount of accountability. He's still operating in an amount of anonymity, much like he then continued to do in Batman vs Superman. So he doesn't give a shit that Metropolis is basically falling down in order for him to defeat Zod. And
No.
they got rid of he dealt with the Doctor Octopus world engine in the Indian Ocean. He dealt with that, and that was a weird scene to watch. His facial expressions were strange.
Did you actually notice? Because I did on my most recent viewing that they when he's standing in the laser just before he blasts through it heroically, the gravitational pressures on his face, and I actually read this up afterwards because I was curious, and it turns out it was deliberate. The pressures on his face actually transform his face into the face of Christopher Reeve.
Oh, really?
Really?
That's fascinating.
It is, just because of the absolutely like borderline hilarious dichotomy of
this is not Christopher Reeve Superman.
Of the notion that they could somehow conflate these two characters as being similar.
They are not. Christopher Reeves literally turned back time in order to do the right thing. That is what that Superman did. This Superman.
Whereas, and I mean, at this point, I think we could, like, if we look past the context of Batman v Superman or anything like that, this is a Superman that, to do the right thing, allowed thousands upon possibly millions of people to die.
And yet, of course, we get to the strangest part of this film to me. Even worse than the Park Kent, because I thought that could have been salvaged, and yet it didn't. No, it is the killing of Zod.
Right. I mean, we can be perfectly opposite about that, viewers. I mean, this is a character that straight up doesn't kill, and he kills someone.
Yes, Superman, Batman, every superhero has killed in one issue or another. Yes, that is the case.
Were those canon issues, or
they were, but they were also in the Silver Age. They were just little issues now and again. It also takes, hundreds of issues of the one writer for them to kind of go, you know what, fuck it, let's get him to kill someone because it's going to spice up my ability to write something. It's not the first film, and it certainly shouldn't be excused because and this is what Snyder has said. Superman had to have killed someone, so he knows that killing is bad.
And I feel like this goes back to like what you were basically saying before, is that if the character of Pa Kent had been done properly, if the origin story of Krypton had been handled the way it should have been, if Jor-El had been even if it was still the hologram, the construction of what Jor-El should have been, all of these influences would have basically taken Superman towards the decision that he absolutely shouldn't have killed this guy. And even to take it back, 30 minutes earlier in the film, that he should never have even let a fucking battle take place in a populated area. The lack of regard for value of life in this film is just quite simply staggering.
Yeah, it is. And, Snyder has also said, oh, well, Star Wars killed 5 planets like it was nothing. No, but
that's an intergalactic war.
And it was done by the villains.
Yeah.
These deaths weren't helped by Superman. He should have done better. He does better.
If anything, the way in which the fight was choreographed, it made it seem that basically like Superman's incompetence in fighting a threat similar to his strength as Zod was, if he'd been a more competent fighter, none of this would have happened, or at least like severely less than this would have happened. This is basically the whole movie is basically just propping up this idea that this guy's an amateur. He doesn't really know. He doesn't want to be Superman really, or also maybe he does, but having this like final battle basically being the proving ground for his ascendancy to the Superman collar feels utterly contrary to the ethos of what Superman should be.
Yeah, and this
it basically discounts itself.
Yeah, and this is supposed to be the film that starts a universe, and that's just
God. And I know we've talked about like the story and the ethos and the ideology and a lot this discussion, and I understand that we are approaching the end here, but I need to take a second, basically, just to discuss the technical aspects of the movie on a visual sense. In terms of construction and special effects. Look, I can't really fault it. They did, within the context of what the movie was trying to do, they did what they were going to do. Fine, whatever. But my whole grievance, and it is a major grievance, is the utter incomprehensibility of the action.
Not only and so incomprehension of the action. Also, at the start of the film, when there wasn't much action, there was the strange edits of flashbacks within flashbacks. Jumping.
Which again, it's curious because I guess we could suggest that the common narrative element in both this movie and Batman v Superman is your darling man David S. Goyer. This is a movie that once again, similar to Batman v Superman, and I swear to Christ, neither of us can go on about this enough, but editorially speaking, in terms of scene selection and narrative progression, was an absolute clusterfuck from start to finish.
It's
I understand. I understand if you want to do, early day, Indy 2 style hyperlink filming where you show the start, but you also show something before the start, and then it all sort of makes sense later on. But even Indy 2 fucked that up with 21 grams. That movie made no fucking sense. I don't understand why there's this notional thing. Look, if you want to try and actually do a movie where you show a scene and then show a prequel scene that is meant to demonstrate the consequence of the scene that just happened, all I can say is you better be fucking good at it. And this movie was not. It made absolutely... look, I'm being kind here, although this is the lowest bar in history that you have to actually hurdle. It was more coherent than Batman v Superman. There, I said it. But then again, most films are. So, I mean, like, when you actually look at these sorts of choices, you have to actually wonder, like, what were they trying to do? Because there's no, I mean, like, on a certain extent, it kind of works, I guess. It keeps the audience guessing what's going to come next or anything like that. That's a very facile excuse, really, because at the end of the day, what you actually don't provide the audience is any sense of narrative through line or sort of holistic mounting motivation for the character. What you have is a sense of disparate scenes that all, in some sort of like holistic sense, vaguely make sense, but like really don't. And so you get this the end result, which is the climactic scene, the battle between Superman and Zod, which, to be like honest, maybe it's audience fatigue, maybe it's just my fatigue. I don't know.
That last 20 minutes was just it was a slog, and it was just this weird like Zod going, I've trained my entire life to make sure that my senses were thing. This is now my final form. Prepare to fight me. This is the boss battle.
Yeah.
It was structured in such a strange way. It doesn't look like if you put this and Batman vs Superman up against Watchmen, you wouldn't believe that it is the same goddamn director.
You wouldn't actually, and I've got to like sort of ask what your opinion on the manifold difference in camera work that exists between Snyder pre Man of Steel, pre his sort of Justice League filmic coterie, and post. Because if you look at the films that came before, and then the ones that come after, specifically this one and Batman v Superman, you wouldn't think it's the same director, because this is a man that, like, in my early days and his early days as being a filmmaker, I mean, like, I marveled at what he was able to do with the camera. If you look at 300...
But they were all intentional shots.
Exactly, and you look at Watchmen as well. This was a man that very, very rarely strayed from a steady cam, that understood the art of a long shot. And I mean that in the length, sorry, not in the zoom or anything like that. But this is a guy that understood that clarity of action and geography of said action was paramount. But then again, most good directors do. And so it's fascinating to me that you can look at something like 300 where through setup and through even the context of the battle itself, he has constructed the entire landscape upon which the scene is going to take place. And so whatever comes after that, you understand that whatever happens is at least not factually true, then geometrically true. And it's the same thing that happens with Watchmen. Establishment, mid-shot, action shots are always held at the mid to long. If it's a close-up, it's to show a singular and immediate emotion of the character, but otherwise it cuts back to mid because the director understands, like so many people do, but also so many people very, very don't, that if you don't see the whole body of the actor in the shot, you don't believe that that shit's actually taking place. You think it's going to be a fucking special effect. And so you look at stuff like that. You look at this glorious, elongated, slow-mo, steady cam work. You look at the first extended battle scene in 300 where he basically just tracks Leonidas along the battlefield, dollies in and out as necessary, but basically just holds and holds and then holds a little fucking more until you actually are truly impressed. And all of those scenes in that movie, but especially that scene in particular, because I feel like it was like his kind of like, welcome, to the band sort of thing. Like, this is what I can do. Please pay attention to me. It just, I find it unfathomable on any kind of logical sense that he would then transition to the Paul Greengrass docudrama shaky cam motherfuckery of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. And the only reason I can come up with is that basically he looks at movies like that. He looks at the shaky cam films, the Bourne films, or something like, to that similarity, and basically decides that if the ethos that Nolan wants to prescribe for this reality is absolute realism and, basically kind of like almost, oh gosh, you were there, I'm going to throw in the shaky cam. And the cinematographer, whose name I actually forget, but he basically said that his inspiration for the cinematography of Man of Steel was the reboot of Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, really? Well,
really?
Battlestar Galactica worked, though.
And I mean that sincerely, because that was a film that was basically about the grittiness of humanity, about the drama of like humanity on the borderline of genocide. But like for a film that at least nominally speaking is meant to be about like hope and joy and a creature or a humanoid that basically embodies the best of us and like can show us that going forward we can be better. It wasn't the right filmic style. I mean, the color palette,
once again, very muted.
Was so muted, was so dead.
Yeah, Superman's attire is the most colourful thing that's out there, and even then, muted reds and muted blues. Like this is a Superman film where there are 3 to 4 scenes where it's taking place in a cemetery.
Yeah.
And that's insanity. This is not a Superman film that I would be proud to show my children, to be like, this is a story about someone who's trying to do the best that they possibly can.
No, and I agree with you. But what I would show this to my children, God forbid that I ever have any audience, that's never going to happen, by the way, unless I make a serious mistake later in life, is basically that this film is not a Superman film. I will never show this to any ancestors of mine or, well, anyone in particular, whether they be related to me or not, as a Superman film. What this is for better or for worse, an incredibly well constructed Aliens Among Us film. And if you did an edit of this movie that removed all references of Superman, you changed the planet Kryptonite to some other shit, you know what? As much as I hate to say it, I think this would be a watchable movie. And part of me thinks that like a lot of like what the grievances we've had tonight are basically because of this film's massive middle finger towards the ethos of what Superman actually is. And it's funny. I'd be curious to actually see, what our reactions to this would be if this was just, like that movie Hancock.
Yeah.
If that was, it's funny because those films, like constructively speaking, in terms of the way they were filmed, are kind of like the same beast. But if someone had just like brought this film to the masses with no outward references of Superman, I kind of wonder what people would have thought.
Yeah, this could have been a good film if it wasn't the film that it was.
Yeah. Oh God. Well, I mean, Jesus, that's about the worst thing you can say about a film ever. It was great. It said that it was trying to be exactly what it was.
I can think of no better place to end it on that.
I was going to say, I like it, except for everything that it was. God almighty. All right, well, I feel like we've exhausted our audience.
I think that is it for this episode.
Although I would argue a lot shorter than the last episode. You're welcome, everyone on the internet. So, before we go, let's tease ever so briefly what we're going to discuss for our next week, and Josh and I basically both decided that we have absolutely had enough of bloated, self-serious, overblown superhero movies for at least a little while. Well, at least until God, I hope good Civil War comes out. But before that, next week's movie is going to be, dearest Joshy?
Yeah, we're going to be watching Creed, the slight reboot to Rocky, with the
and/or spiritual remake.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this.
And I'm quite excited as well. Actually, to be honest, man, I really am.
Yeah, this is we're now getting we're out of the woods now, and we're starting to watch some films that we actually really enjoy watching.
This is the thing. This is what's going to happen. We'll watch films that we have to watch because, God damn it, we're men of the people, and what the people want is what the people get. But you know what? A lot of the time, we're just going to fucking watch pictures that we want to watch. And hell with you if you think otherwise, unless you do think otherwise, in which case comment on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or our website, in which case I assume we'll probably dramatically
listen, if you are enjoying this, please leave us a review on iTunes. It really does help us, rise up, get more, listeners. Currently, as of this recording, we are a place behind the Brendan Fraser Appreciation Podcast.
What?
Yep. So I personally want to get in front of that. So if you could,
it's a big ask. It's a big fucking ask.
It's a big ask. They haven't got to the money yet. So I think we've got a bit of time. So listeners, please send us a review. We would really appreciate it. You can also head over to our website. It's fromthesilverscreen.com. Follow us there. You can find all of our social media links. You can find myself on Twitter. I'm at Josh Tregenza. Damian, you don't have a Twitter, but where can people find you if they want to talk with you?
If people want to find me, you can find me on both Facebook and Instagram. I'm quite a frequent, unfortunate presence on both of those social media platforms. So by all means, be the person that reaches out and discusses. I also monitor the official Came From the Silver Screen Facebook page. So if you have any questions or queries or anything like that, or you want to see less of me, you can absolutely troll me on that page. I will read it and then promptly ignore it afterwards. But you know what? Power to you as a human being. I wish you all the best. But I think that is it for us at the moment, Josh. So congratulations on coming in at under less than 2 hours. And, mate, I will see you next week.
I'll see you next week for Creed. Thanks, everyone.
Woo!